What's up YouTube? So today I'm going to entertain the question, should you spend money on a gacha game? I'll first talk about what gacha games are, why do people spend money on them, and how much money is too much. I'll then talk about the different various mindsets about this issue, and then I'll end the video with my own personal thoughts. So hopefully by the end of the video, I'll either save you some money or give you enough reason to justify spending money yourself on an online game. So, what is a gacha game? I'm assuming most of you who clicked on this video already know what gacha games are, but for those who aren't familiar with the term gacha games are video games that utilize the gacha mechanic. Well, what's a gacha mechanic? Essentially, it's a loot box mechanic where players can spend in-game currency to receive random virtual prizes, things like rare characters, weapons, and armor. Imagine yourself as a young kid at the shopping mall putting a quarter into a capsule toy vending machine. In exchange for your quarter, you get a random toy. That's the most wholesome way I can explain the concept of gacha. It's a fairly simple concept, yet gacha has often been notoriously compared to gambling and as a result, can lead to unhealthy habits and addictive behaviors. This idea is not exclusive to gacha games on the phone. The idea of gacha, loot boxes, and microtransactions has been embedded in video games of all genres such as mobile games, first-person shooters, sports games, and MMOs, especially those that are free-to-play games. Many people perceive these often free-to-play games as predatory, luring you in by selling to you the idea of a free-to-play game, where the developers often offer incentives such as a free costume or bonus item if you register. Sounds awesome, right? Think again. You may think you have nothing to lose by joining their free game, or in some cases paid games such as FIFA or Star Wars Battlefront, but what you're actually subscribing to is often a gaming environment that will slowly seduce you into spending money on microtransactions, whether that be for cosmetics or to gain a competitive edge. I won't dive too much more into the definition since I'm sure you're all well aware already, given the current landscape of video games implementing microtransactions. Though many critics will suggest these gacha systems are predatory and should be regulated, sometimes even removed, I also understand why they exist. At the end of the day, this is all business. Game developers need to generate revenue in order to pay their employees and to keep the game servers running. If they're able to deliver quality updates, then they may even earn profit, which should be reinvested back into the game in order to improve the game's quality and to attract new players, thus creating a self-stimulating game. That came out wrong, but you guys know what I mean. So although I can understand why people may not subscribe to the idea of loot boxes and microtransactions, I can also understand why they're needed like yin and yang, especially with free-to-play games where the developers do not earn any money on the front end. They are incurring that risk, and if nobody spends any money, then they can't keep the game alive. Now onto my next point, which is, why do people spend additional money inside these games? What is it that is so attractive enough to entice them to further spend money on their games? Whether you're a free-to-play player, or that Japanese guy who spent over $75,000 on Fate Go waifus, there's plenty of reasons to spend money inside these games. The first reason that might pop into your mind would be that players spend money in order to get a competitive edge, some sort of progressional advantage. This comes in many forms. Take Genshin Impact for instance. One may spend money in order to pull the top tier characters such as Ketching and Diluc, in addition to powerful weapons and armor, all for the sake of maximizing their virtual prowess. Not only does this give the player a competitive edge, but allows that player to show off. Raw power alone is not exclusive to showing off, however. You can spend money to show off rare items and costumes for your characters. Most modern and classic games capitalize on the idea of skins and cosmetics for your character. Oftentimes, these skins and costumes are only cosmetic and offer no tangible benefit besides making your character look cool. The added thought that your character is wearing something that most other players don't have is simply compelling. Take MapleStory for instance. MapleStory is an open-world MMORPG where you play as an adventurer through the lens of your typical RPG classes such as warriors, mages, archers, and thieves. As a result, you can imagine the equipment for those types of classes to look fairly primitive, for a lack of a better term. But fear not, you can buy dope looking clothes through the game's cash shop using a special currency obtainable by spending real life cash. The freedom in customizing your avatar with a plethora of different cosmetics and apparel allows for a very expressive and tailored experience. Besides reinforcing your experience with top-tier characters and flashy skins, there are other reasons for people to spend money on an online game. Time is of the essence, and that saying applies to video games as well. Oftentimes, players will spend additional money to either accelerate a process or to obtain more stamina and energy in games that employ that feature. As a result, this will speed up their climb to the top ranks and grant them the additional resources in order to do so. This is a clear advantage of spending money for convenience that many free-to-play players don't have the luxury of doing. On the other hand, a more selfless reason that players might have for putting money into the game is simply because they enjoy the game for what it is, and wish to support the game and keep it alive. As much as many players jump to judge who we call whales, people who spend whaling amounts of money on these games, we have to admit that they are a crucial piece of the puzzle that keeps the games we love alive and going. Next, I want to present to you the different kinds of players and mindsets revolving around the discussion of spending money on an online game, particularly gacha games. To illustrate the spectrum of players in a nutshell, you start out with your free-to-play players, then to players who may spend 20 to 40 bucks here and there, then to what people categorize as dolphins, those who may have spent several hundreds of dollars over the course of a few months, and finally the infamous whales, those who perpetually spend thousands of dollars on a given game. I'll start from the top with whales and then close the discussion with the free-to-play player mindset. Now, if you're watching this video, then odds are you're already aware of what and who they are. Now, I can safely say that most players will impulsively jump to the conclusion that whales are just a bunch of rich people throwing thousands of dollars at their game. This is not always the case. Sure, you're always going to have those rich people who are bored out of their minds and have no qualms throwing thousands, sometimes millions of dollars at a video game. However, a more overlooked population of the so-called whales are actually regular people in the lower to middle class that have extremely poor spending habits and sometimes addictive behaviors. This is the unfortunate reality that plagues many poor souls. From what I've seen on Reddit, these whales are more likely than not college students, people who've recently graduated, and sometimes even parents. Imagine coming fresh out of school with a brand new job and a stable income. You're finally making a decent chunk of money, but you also suck at finances because I'm willing to bet you've never learned anything about finances in school. I would say that's a fair assumption given how much the average millennial knows about budgeting and investing. As a result, this demographic of people are more likely to be the ones who spend hundreds and even thousands on entertainment simply because they're not used to making money. I myself am guilty of this. Coming out of school with an engineering degree, I suddenly went from making no money to now making a comfortable amount of money. And instead of saving and investing it like I should have, I went on a spending spree. Now, this is just a general life tip for any of you whales or soon-to-be whales out there. You may not think you're doing anything wrong now, but let's say for example you're going to spend 500 bucks on a game. If you choose to do that, think about what other things you're missing out on with that $500 you're spending. Many whales have spent thousands on a game and not carried any regrets with them in that moment. However, they may come to a realization later on that their purchase was a mistake. A few $1,000s spent on the mobile game could have been the down payment of a brand new home. Just some things to think about. I would put dolphins on the same boat, but to a lesser extent. Spending hundreds of dollars on a given game is surely no chump change. However, to a person who has a decent job, let's say they make over $75K a year, then spending a few $100s a month on games is not really negatively impacting their lives in the short term. This raises the question, just because you can afford it, should you? Dolphins, along with most others, will agree that as long as the finances related to your purchases do not come at the cost of living essentials such as housing, food, and water, then you're probably fine with making that purchase. This type of purchase is comparable to spending money on entertainment in ways such as eating out, going out to the movies, or buying drinks at a nightclub. I'll explain this parallel more later in the video after I've talked about free-to-play players. The next question to answer is, how much money is too much money, and how does that tie everything together that we talked about thus far? I'll start with talking about the various types of free-to-play players. The first kind that comes to mind are simply players who have no money. This was me as a student in high school and college. As much as I would love to have more octuplet crystals to summon Fate Go waifus, I simply just didn't have the money, and if I did, I would have spent it on other essentials such as food, gas, and clothes. Very important things to have as a young adult in school. I was happy with just playing the game for what it is. I knew top players received help through spending loads of money, but that didn't take away from my experience playing many of these online and mobile games. I simply grinded my ass off, and the reward at the end for all my hard work made all the time spent grinding worth it. Then there is a second group of free-to-play players who almost put themselves on a pedestal and view themselves as morally superior to those who've contributed money to the game. They pride themselves more so on the fact that they haven't spent money to get where they're at, and place less focus on the truly rewarding aspect of working hard for a reward. In their eyes, anyone who is above them are simply rich whales who have had to spend thousands of dollars to get to where they're at. The last group of players that I want to illuminate are comprised of free-to-play players, players who've spent some money, and even dolphins who have spent hundreds, basically anyone who is not a whale yet, and for some reason, something is holding them back from spending $20, an additional $50, even an additional $300. These players have this similar mindset in which they will stop themselves from spending any further money on an online game simply because the game or server will shut down its services in a few years. Because there's nothing physical and permanent that acts as a potential investment, this discourages the players enough from spending any more money. Now, I can understand this belief to an extent, but I will come out and say that this kind of thinking is intellectually flawed. You should not treat video game microtransactions as the same thing as a physical good or an investment. These types of video game purchases are meant to be treated as entertainment. Remember earlier when I compared spending money on gacha games to things like eating out, going to the movies, and buying drinks at the nightclub? The commonalities that all these activities share is that they're all experiences meant for entertainment and will disappear once you're done with them. The food you eat just turns to shit. Does that mean you should just buy McDonald's every day as opposed to a filet mignon? No. Can you compare spending money on gacha games to buying anime figures that you could potentially resell in the future? No, and quick side note, if you're the type of person to buy anime figures, you're probably not going to sell them down the road unless you're trying to downsize your collection. So don't think your purchase has to be something tangible and permanent in order for you to get enjoyment out of it. You can't resell your experiences, so does that mean they hold no value? Of course not. To give you another example, tons of people play Final Fantasy XIV Online and pay monthly subscriptions knowing full well that one day the services may end, but the focus is on the time they enjoyed while playing and not on some physical memorabilia. So at the end of the day, what is the conclusion and what are my personal thoughts on the matter? My stance on this whole subject matter is, it's entirely okay whichever route you choose to take, whether that's becoming a free-to-play player or someone who has the funds and wishes to invest more of themselves into the game within reason, of course. I feel you should do whatever makes you happy and don't fret too much about spending a bit of money if you genuinely find enjoyment out of that time. Understand that in many cases, it's not going to be an investment but more like paying for entertainment. Also understand that an expensive gaming account with all the strongest gear does not directly equate to a higher quality gaming experience, similarly to how playing a difficult game using a cheat engine does not innately provide a higher quality experience. As for how much I think you should spend, I personally feel that you should spend however much you'd like, considering a few caveats. You should not spend to the extent that causes you to have to live outside your means, causing you distress in your day-to-day life. But also be sure to not to obsess over every little penny. As long as the amount of enjoyment you get from your purchase matches the amount of money you paid, then I would say that's a purchase done with a good conscience. And finally, I'll throw in some money saving tips should you decide to spend money on a gacha game. If you were like me in high school and college, then you probably didn't have too much extra money lying around to spend on a gacha game. The first thing I would suggest you do would be to set a monthly budget for yourself. This could be something like $20 or $40 a month, for instance. This would keep you accountable and prevent you from overspending your budget. If you're the type of person to set strict budgets for yourself, you also have to understand that you may not always get the things you want in these games. In these cases, you unfortunately have to accept the loss and save up for next time. Fight the urge to spend additional money here. Now, ask yourself this question: how long do you see yourself playing the game for? If you're only playing it for 2 weeks and you're gonna quit, then it's probably not worth it for you to spend the extra money over. If you're going to spend hundreds of dollars, maybe even thousands on a given game, also think to yourself, would it be cheaper to just buy a high-leveled account outright if possible? In most cases, this would be the cheaper option. If you wish to build everything up on your own, then I would recommend spending money first on any kind of bundle or purchase that guarantees you an item or character, as opposed to just buying in-game currency and doing random pulls. You could literally be throwing your money away if your luck is bad enough. Fortunately, most gacha games will have some kind of special package for newbies that guarantees a 5-star character or item. I would take these deals over random pulls any day. Well, that concludes my discussion and thoughts on whether or not you should spend money on gacha games, or any online game for that matter, but I don't want my discussion to end here, so please let me know in the comments below what type of player you identify as, what games you play, and the reasons for why you either spend or not spend money on any of these games. Thanks again for watching, everyone. I'm Martin, and I hope you have a nice day.